Hey, welcome to Life in the Leadership Lane. I'm your host, Bruce Waller, where I'm getting to talk to leaders that are making a difference in the workplace and in our community. What do they do to get started, and what are they doing to stay there, to stay in that leadership lane? And today, I'm getting to talk to another special guest. Her name is Angela Deputy. She is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Heartland Veterinary Partners, and I am so excited to have you on the show. How you doing, Angela?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Bruce.
I'm so excited to have you here too. And I want to give a real quick shout out, a mutual friend of ours, Jill Cole, who's the CHRO at Mid-Atlantic Dental Partners, episode 45. She actually introduced us, so I'm so grateful for her to introduce us.
She did. She's fantastic. So I'm glad to be here.
That's one of the things I've really enjoyed about the podcast is not just having the interviews and having these purposeful conversations, but the connections are just absolutely amazing. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about networking. We're going to talk about leadership development. It's going to be a great show. I want to start though. I would love to hear you share just a brief highlight of Heartland Veterinary Partners and how you serve your customers.
Yeah, sounds great. So Heartland Veterinary Partners is a veterinary service organization. And at the core, we are essentially here to make the lives of veterinarians easier. You know, you think about your small vets that have been in their communities for years and years, who have established independent practices and connections within the communities, who are in some cases getting ready to move on with retirement, and they want to phase out in a easier way, more comfortable way. So they will sell their practice to Heartland. And our goal is to help manage a lot of the back end stuff for them as they ease their way into retirement. In some cases, we'll purchase practices and there's no plans for retirement and they'd like to remain with Heartland, which is always very exciting. We want that too. But at the end of the day, you know, a veterinarian's job is incredibly difficult, and I'm not sure I fully understood that coming into this organization. They have one of the most challenging jobs in any industry that I've been in, and we are here to help make it just a little bit easier for them, handling some of their back end stuff. So.
Yeah, I love that. I don't think I've had anybody on yet from a veterinary organization. And I know we have a lot of pet lovers out there. I can't even imagine. We actually, anytime we take our dog in, I mean, we're so like thankful for those communities that help us with our pets. Hey, I'm ready to really dive in, but I want to start the show. I love to hear about the story of our guest, and I want to hear the Angela Deputy story. How did you, where'd you grow up? And how in the world did you get into leadership, in particular, serving HR?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, it's funny. You sent some of this stuff over for me to think about before this podcast, and I thought, gosh, nobody ever has really asked me to tell my story like that. And I thought, what the hell is my story? But no, I grew up in New Jersey, a small lake town. I grew up in the area, we call it the Garden State for a reason. And I grew up in that area up in northern New Jersey, a small town called Hopatcong, and ended up doing my undergrad at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. And I was a psychology, sociology, criminal justice, psychology major, criminal justice sociology minor. And I really thought I was going to go into some sort of criminal psychology at the time. And my senior year, I took a industrial organization course, psychology course. And I loved it. It was fascinating to me how data could be used to help motivate teams or inform teams. What I really valued about it was the way it showed that organizations are systems and everything's interconnected. And something about the psychology of that was very fascinating to me. And at the time, it wasn't huge in organizations to invest in OD departments. You know, this was like, early 90s. It wasn't that that the HR business partner hadn't even been really introduced to organizations at that time. So they said the closest you can probably come to it if you're not going to go work for a consulting firm somewhere is to be in HR. So I said, I want to be in HR. I want to be in HR. That was kind of my thing. And I bartended. I was thinking about this morning too, based on this question, because I thought, where was another connection for me? So I bartended my way through undergrad, which was awesome. And I was building training modules for the waitress, the wait staff there at the bar. It was like my natural, for some reason, I wanted to make sure that we had process and procedure and that people were fully trained and developed. And so even at that point, I had this bend towards, helping people and teaching people and developing people. And so that's how I started to lean into it. So I first job was with Anixter International out of undergrad. And I started as a ops person. I was working in a warehouse, and answering phones, eventually moved into sales for them. And Anixter didn't have a huge HR department, but what they did have was a massive learning and development department. Julie Anixter, who led learning and development for them at the time, I thought at the time she was pretty cutting edge. Like, this was before internet, you know what I mean? This was before virtual learning. Everything was really classroom, and Julie had this whole curriculum set up for Anixter salespeople that was really robust and great. And so I got my entry into human resources at Anixter through learning and development, grit, instructional design, and facilitation. I value that time in operations, and that sort of, you'll hear probably later as we talk, has always been at the core of what I've done. I didn't grow up in HR. I grew up in ops, right? That's where I started my career. So I left Anixter. We moved to Michigan, and we were living in Philly when I was with Anixter. We moved to Michigan, got married somewhere in there to my brilliant husband, Doug. And when we moved to Michigan, I joined Volkswagen of America. Started with them doing online learning instructional design, which was cool. I'm glad I did that for a while. But that's eventually where I moved into org development. I had just an incredible leader there, and she taught me all about practical org development and the importance of custom intervention and custom design to meet teams where they are. And so I spent about 5 years there. I had both my boys there. I always say I was in Michigan to get my youngest on skates. He's a hockey player, and I swear that's why I did time in Michigan. He was on skates at 2, and he hasn't taken them off since. So that's why I did that time there. And then kids were small. I wanted to be closer to family, so I started looking for jobs in Indiana. My husband's family's in Indiana. And got a job with Roche Diagnostics. We moved down there, did that for a few years, led their leadership development and organizational development activities for a while. And then this role with Walgreens popped up. And that was just, my Walgreens career lasted for about 10 years. Probably obviously the most significant because of the amount of time I spent, but also pretty significant because they moved me around laterally, and I moved up a lot as well. But probably every year and a half to 2 years, they were moving me into something new, which was great. So I started in a field talent role for them, moved into leadership and learning and development for them, had the opportunity to launch Walgreens University with them. And then I had the opportunity to move into an HR business partner role. And that, for me, like I had said to them, because HR was going through HR transformation, they were starting to build out the HR business partner roles. Throughout all my career, I had worked in different organizations where centers of excellence had evolved, some organizations where they hadn't evolved. In the ones where they had evolved, I had a time, it was difficult for me. I've never been really good at influencing from afar. I've always been much better if I have that seat at the table. It's just easier for me to get to it. I can just cut to the chase, and I don't have a lot I have to navigate. I'm not very tactful like that. And so I knew I was better with a seat at the table, like an HR business partner versus being in a center of excellence. So I had moved from learning and development. They gave me an opportunity to get my feet wet in an HR business partner role with supply chain of all places, which my head of supply chain, best business partner ever. He just let me fall on my face all the time. And he was so forgiving and just the best to learn with. Ruben Sloan, he's a brilliant supply chain leader. And so then they moved me. I led human resources for pretty much every division at Walgreens, with the exception, I didn't lead pharmacy directly. I led field ops overall and didn't lead finance, but we were such close partners, it didn't matter. And I did that for a long time, but it eventually, 10 years, I moved around a lot. I wanted to try something new. Aspen Dental reached out to me. Just a great culture, really great people. Went over there for a bit, and then that was probably the shortest stint I've done in my career was at Aspen, and it wasn't for any other reason other than Heartland, getting called about this Heartland job and the opportunity to learn the CHRO function in just an industry that truly does make a difference in so many people's lives in all the right ways. And so it was just an opportunity I couldn't pass up. So that's my story. Two beautiful children, 17 and 18. I do have to put a plug in for the band. So my 18-year-old is going to be a rock star. He's a drummer, plays for a band called Axe, AX, and the Hatchet Men, and you can find them on Spotify and Apple Music. It's really good stuff. And then my youngest, I told you, he's a hockey player, and he's a junior, and we're starting to look at colleges. So, and my dog's name is Otto. He's a little Shih Tzu, and he's a little jerk, but I love him. So.
And he's also on your LinkedIn profile, I believe, right?
He's also on my LinkedIn profile.
I will. I'll definitely put the band. I'll put that link in the show notes so people can check that out. That sounds very energizing and exciting. Wow. One of the things that I really appreciate you sharing was, you didn't just like start out as a CHRO. You like talked about moving around a lot of different places. As a matter of fact, in one role, you talked about being in ops and actually taking a sales role, right? And then moving it, and then you're moving in all these different roles. I'm wondering, and I know that you said early on that, man, when you took that course in organizational development, that it really inspired you. But was there a time like when you knew that you found your lane, you knew you found your purpose in your career? Was there like a moment for that? Because obviously you spent a lot of time at Walgreens. You did some really exciting things there, but like, was there a time where you're like, man, I love what I do?
It's funny that you asked. Like, I don't know that I ever there was like a day that I woke up and I was like, man, I love what I do. I've just always loved what I do. I can't think about it any other way. Like, I just always loved serving people in organizations and watching teams. That's the thing about this job too. Like, it's not like you get in human resources, you get to check a box, or it's not like somebody is walking over to you and going, man, thank you for influencing me the way you do. There's something about the sort of background, subtle, impact that I feel like we make in human resources that's always been very attractive to me, and to be able to watch it from afar and to just know, I did that, I helped to influence that, but they're not being a big, well, Angela Deputy did this. What I mean? Like, I just always liked sort of being in the background and being the partner to somebody or to a team or division or company, being that partner, that thought partner, that support partner, whatever it was. I've just always really enjoyed that. So no, there wasn't a day I woke up and went, man, I've never said I'm good at this ever. You'll never hear me say that. So I've never felt, incredibly confident.
Or like you've arrived, right? Like,
Exactly.
I have arrived. I'm here.
No,
You
Never
know,
felt that way ever.
yeah, as a matter of fact, I mean, I can tell that what you said, like I've always loved serving people, just like when you were, serving in a bar and you're helping people, put together processes and things in place. I just love that. I do want to talk about, because there's a lot of people that are listening. And by the way, if you're listening, you need to get out your pen and your journal because there's going to be some good stuff here. I want to talk about building teams, and because that's really a strength of yours. But one of the things that you said, and I wrote this down, and I've always wondered, is this is this a myth? Is this a seat at the table? You mentioned earlier that you wanted a seat at the table. Talk about that just for a second. Like, why is that important to have that seat at the table?
Yeah, I mean, that's where you do your influencing, and that's where you can move teams along in a different way. And it's you can ask a question, just to inspire some different thinking. You don't always have to be, the knowledge sitting at the table or the one driving what's happening at the table, but simply by asking a question or asking, if they've considered looking at things another way, that's where you influence change right
Mm,
there in those discussions, that's where I think it makes a difference. So, and part of it's style though, too, Bruce, I don't have, that's why it's been so comfortable for me. I don't know that that's always the right place. Just from a style perspective, it's been the right place for me because I cut to the chase. That's my style. I just say it and that's it. And sometimes it lands like a lead balloon, but it's always easier to do that at the table than have somebody else do it for you
yeah,
because
no, I
it
love
never
that.
comes out the way you intend it.
No, I love that because I think there's a lot of people that are listening that might be, I don't know, they maybe they're in a manager role or a director role and they're like, hey, I want a seat at the table. And I want them to hear that. But when you talk about influencing, I mean, you didn't just all of a sudden just start diving into asking the question. I mean, you had to build that relationship first, right? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
you have to get to a point before you can start influence. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, you got to build the trust, right? But when you have that seat at the table, it doesn't mean you can always or should always speak up, right? Like you do have to earn it a little bit. So yeah, no, you got to build that trust first.
Love that. Absolutely love that. You've talked a little bit about, some of the mentors that have helped you along the way. I think that's so important. And especially you mentioned I didn't write down the name, but you said he let me fall on my face. I love
Ruben,
that. I mean,
Ruben Slow.
yeah, I mean, I have like I've my career's been all about that, but that's how we learn. So I always like to ask a question around, were there some mentors that have really helped you, and you've mentioned some different things, and then also, do you mentor others today?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I mean, mentoring. So I decided early on that much of my learning would be out of a classroom and outside of a book. So there's so many, in every interaction I have and every leader I've had has mentored me and coached me in very different ways. And I've sucked it up for everything I could get from it. So there's way too many to mention, honestly. Every single connection I've had, even the crappiest ones, even the ones that I was going home at night, crying and thinking, what the heck did I get myself into? And they were, so painful I wanted to rip my skin off. Even those, today I can tell you there were things that I learned from that experience, and I would call that person a mentor in some sort of way. So yeah, and as far as mentoring others, I spent a long time with the Healthcare Business Women's Association in Chicago, and I remember one of the presidents she was opening up a seminar, and she said it probably best. And she said, it's incumbent upon us as women, as we do move further and further in our career, to make sure we're bringing the elevator down to bring others up with us. And so I do, especially for women, it's just natural in my bones to develop others and to teach others who are willing to engage in it. but especially women who I think can move quickly up in their careers, who are willing to take that sort of mentoring. I do that quite a bit as well.
I'm glad you also mentioned about you learned from mentors that weren't that they weren't a great boss, or they weren't a great leader. I've had a couple of those during my career, and when I look back, I learned so much from them. Number one, how I didn't want to do things, but number two, I mean, gave me some great practical advice I hadn't even thought about after I'd made the decisions, that some of the decisions I made. So we can learn from both the good and the bad. There's no question about that. And I love how you talk about, once we go up in the elevator, we got to bring that elevator back down. Oh man, that's so good. Hey, let's talk a little bit about leadership. I mean, here we are, 2021. We're in the summer, and we're navigating through this pandemic, getting through that. I always like to ask this question. Leadership, I mean, everyone seems to have a different way of defining it. I always like to ask how, if somebody said, what's leadership to you, how would you define that?
Yeah, I think, again, I only did a lot of thinking about this because you sent me this question, and I thought, gosh, in my whole career, like, you would think I would get that question, but unless I was teaching a course with somebody else's view on what it is, I don't think I ever sat back to think about it myself. And I thought about it coming in, and I was thinking, it's really, for me, it's to be in service of others in some sort of way. And that's really it. And whether, that service is to influence or to actually do, or to help them achieve something that they didn't think they could possibly ever in a lifetime achieve, we're in service of them in some sort of way. And that's what I think it is.
I love that. I absolutely love that, in service. I do want to talk. I want to talk team building here, because you are very experienced at this, and I'm excited to kind of dive into this. And one of the areas of team building is obviously leadership development. And I would like to ask, first of all, what do you like as a CHRO? You are responsible for a lot of different things. Number one question for you is there an area that you do enjoy most in your role?
Yeah, well, so I enjoy it partially because I've been able to flex the muscle more when you look at sort of the broad scope of human resources. So I do have more of a bend towards development, right? Because at my core, my roots were in training, development, talent management, learning and development, right? So I like it more because I don't have to think as hard about it anymore than if I'm sitting down to re-level a bunch of jobs and do a comp analysis, right? Like, I really have to lean into that. So I do have a bend towards people development, talent management, leadership development, etc. It's also, for me, it's sort of the sexier side of human resources, right? As you look at the full scope of human resources, some of it can get really staunch and compliance and policy related. And with learning and development, if you're doing it right, you really get to see some change there pretty quickly, and it's sort of the more exciting to me, the sexier side of what we do. So.
And part of that leadership development, when we were talking before offline, we talked a little bit about succession planning. And one of the things you mentioned that really caught my attention was we talked a little bit about the 9-box theory. And I was wanting to know, number one, why don't more organizations have succession planning, like do succession planning? I think a lot of companies want to do that, but just don't quite, they're just not purposeful in doing that. But you talked a little bit about the 9-box there. I'd like to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, with it, I can really only speak to my experiences with it in the various organizations I was in, and where I've seen it used, in a way that's much more powerful, and where I've seen it sort of cut short. So the 9-box in and of itself is pretty cool, right? Because it helps us get more objective about our assessment of our talent and more consistent in our assessment of our talent. It helps us, if we know the capabilities we're trying to build in the organization. It helps us talk through those and then position our talent accordingly. So in and of itself, I think it's a good identification tool and a good tool to drive some objectivity and consistency in how we manage talent in an organization. Where it can fall short is if we don't tack the development planning on to the back end of it. So it just becomes a 9 box with people's names in it and becomes a sort of mysterious activity that our leadership team is navigating in the background of the organization. But the real power in it is those conversations that we have about our talent. You know, our talent should know what those conversations are. You know, everybody should know what people say about us when we're not in the room, good, bad, or indifferent. And so the outcome of that 9 box conversation should be a really robust development plan for people. And that's where organizations can fall short. If you're just throwing people in that 9 box and then you're identifying your successors based off of that, but your talent isn't actually getting something out of it, and we're not actually developing people to grow, then it's useless. It's just a piece of paper with names on it.
You know, I know before the pandemic, one of the leading things that we would talk about is there's a war on talent. And now here we are in summer of 2021, and everyone's talking about we can't find talent. And I was having a conversation with someone just the other day, and they were talking about the importance of, call it a farming concept, right? Train and develop your people inside the organization. And I just think that, like, right now, it's more important than ever. So for people that are like listening to the show right now or watching this, what are some different things, like if you were going to just kind of give some insight on, hey, paint a picture on like, what does a good development program look like?
Yeah, I mean, difference between sort of individual development plans, which are very custom to the individual, versus development programs, which I had a British counterpart at Walgreens who used to call it sheep dipping. He would say, you know, you're putting everybody through it. It's sheep dipping, right? So I sort of distinguish it like that. So, you know, at the core, I think everybody should have a good, robust development plan coming out of whatever talent conversations we're having, that's focused on their strengths and their development opportunities, but that is a good holistic breakdown of development. So that's focused on, you know, a large portion of it is focused on the job learning and stretching them a bit. A good portion of it is focused on mentoring and networking and coaching, because, you know, we learn from people, we learn from those relationships, right? And then a much smaller part of it on some sort of formal training and development to help fill some of those gaps. Now, on the sheep dipping side, on the side where you're putting everybody through sort of similar things, I think, you know, a good, robust program is focused on the moments that matter in that particular job lifespan, right? So from the moment they come in, what are they going to need? At sort of that midpoint in their career, what are they going to need? And as they're transitioning out, which is something we think about here a lot at Heartland, what do they need from us from the development perspective, right? So that's sort of how I distinguish the two. You have sort of curriculum and these development strategies that you're putting in place. But then, you know, it's also super important to meet team members where they are and ensure that they have individual development plans, and not plans that get put on the shelf, you know, that are looked at once a year. These are ongoing iterative solutions that we're revisiting on a regular basis.
I love that. As a matter of fact, I had a HR leader, Erica Rooney, talk about personal growth plans. And one of the questions I always like to ask about that, because I worked for an organization before where there was a emphasis put on the importance of personal growth plans. Everybody needed to have one. This particular organization, it was like, you're going to have one or you're not going to be here. But when she talked about it, she talked about, you know what, I like what you said, meet people where they are. So we want them to opt into that. We want them to know they have that. Any thoughts around that? Like when someone new comes into, let's say, your organization, or maybe some of your experience from the past, is that something that they would opt into, or is that something that you would say, hey, we want to grow you, and let's work together on this.
Listen, I have a firm belief that it always has to be opt-in. You can't, because people will decide what they want to lean into and what they don't, and we shouldn't force them. But that's also how potential is assessed. We have to think about, whether or not they're out there and they're stretching themselves and they're taking advantage of the opportunities and they're flexible and they're adaptable and their willingness to move on. So some people they just don't want to. They're just happy doing what they're doing in the space that they're in, and they don't want to learn and develop in the way that we suggest that they need to. There's certainly some compliance related things, obviously, that we have to push on people, but professional development at the end of the day it's incumbent upon the organization to ensure that we have the infrastructure and the services in place to provide the opportunity. That's our responsibility as an organization. But it's then the individual's responsibility to decide if they want to take advantage of it and how much they want to put themselves into it.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. I love that. As a matter of fact, Halima McWilliams talked about the importance of opting in. I've heard other HR leaders talk about that as well. I think that's so true. Hey, is personal assessments, is that always part of a development program? Any thoughts around personal leadership
strongly
assessments?
About assessments. I feel so strongly. It's funny. Maybe I mentioned this when we first met, and that's why you asked me this question. I think some of them are really incredible, and I think some of them are just crap. And I always say, like self-awareness is highly overrated sometimes, and I just make a joke out of it because I do get that you have to be self-aware to be a really good leader.
Yeah.
But there comes a point where you can just continue to assess the crap out of something and you still land in the same place, right? And so, I think what we have to own as leaders is there's no perfect profile. And assessments are in place to help us understand our profile and where those things about us are working in our favor and where we may be derailing ourselves along the way. And then we decide what we want to take ownership in. But, taking 10 different assessments that tell you the same thing in 10 different ways isn't really beneficial. So I think about assessments the way I honestly think about everything in executive and leadership development. And that's, it's like if you're sick, you take certain medicines based on the illness that you have. That's how I think about leadership development tools, that it's not a one size fits all. We're going to have a need, and that's how we should go seek either the assessment or the executive coaching or the class or the, seminar or the book, based on whatever our particular need is and how significant it is. The more in depth, the need is, the more significant then the solution that we should be bringing forward.
That is so good. Hey, you also mentioned a word in here that I think is so important, and I'm just wondering, is this a purposeful part of a leadership development program? And that is networking. Networking has been a big part of my career. I tell people all the time, your network is your net worth. That's so important to do. But what are your thoughts around that?
So in every leadership development program that I've built in my career, there's always been an element of networking to it, especially on the peer level. And mostly because in many of the organizations I work with, whether it was Roche at the time when we built a program for there, Walgreens when we built a program there, and even Aspen when we built a program there, peers are, especially high potential peers, are often so much in competition with each other that they're not stopping to figure out a way to learn from each other and how, I may have strengths or gaps that my peer may actually have different strengths and gaps in, and we can complement each other. And man, are we more powerful together than apart. And so that's always been sort of a message that I've sent, especially on the peer level. I think the further we move up in our career, external networking is even more critical, right? And so like even at this point, taking on this job at Heartland, I've made sure to stay in touch with my previous CHROs or peers that I have who are now CHROs. And I even have Jim Riley, who's been a fantastic mentor of mine. He's set up monthly, meetings with me so I can continue to learn from him and grow through that relationship and through that networking. Before I took this job here, I called one of my old peers, who's a CHRO, Kim Sullivan, and just said, "Hey, give me some advice. What am I walking into?" Right. So like, those networks are super critical, and it becomes more difficult further up we move in our career to find these learning opportunities. So we have to come together as a network to learn from each other.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, because I've talked to several top leaders, and it seems like the higher you go up in the organization, the more challenging it gets. I mean, you're busy, right? And so trying to put things in place. Hey, I want to just pivot here just for a second. I want to talk about high performing teams for a second. And this is all what we've been talking about, is all about developing high performing teams. I'm curious. My first question to you is, what are some characteristics of a high performing team? How would you characterize that?
I think these are teams that are highly collaborative, that have a vision. I always get this visual when I think about a high performing team of a team sitting in a boat together, all rowing in the same direction with different colored shirts on. Right?
Love that.
There's definitely some diversity on that boat, but we're all headed in the same direction, And if there's a shark we're battling along the way, we're all battling that shark together. That's sort of the visual representation for me. I think there's plenty that derail teams along the way. And if the team is strong enough, they can fight off those derailers together versus just depending on a leader to do that. And I also think it takes a leader in a high performing team who, knows where to place their ego at appropriate times, so the team can fully engage and their strengths can fully come out and they can fully contribute, because that's the real power in it.
Yeah, that's so good. So someone like, for, let's say, your teams in the past or your team now, and somebody's listening, or somebody that's in a role similar to yours, and I'm thinking about some of our listeners that are, they're wanting to work their way up. What are some things that they should, or focus on to be part of that high performing team that you're talking about?
When I think about my best teams, I have an incredible team at Walgreens, incredible team at Aspen. I have an awesome team here. And I think about what made them so great, or what makes them so great. Just pure humility and the willingness to challenge and the willingness to contribute. Nobody was ever a victim on my best teams. My very best teams, nobody was ever a victim of the environment, the circumstances. We knew where we had to go. And so we were all in it to get there, and we were humble and pushed back appropriately. So that's what I think it takes,
Humility, challenging, and contribution. I appreciate you sharing the challenging piece of it, because I will tell you that a lot of people, it seems to me that many have a hard time challenging, right? They're like, hey, you know what, this is how it's going to be. And I think that I had a coach one time talk to me about the importance of challenging. And then he said that when you challenge the situation, people don't look at it that you're opposed or anything. They look at it like you care. And so I want people to hear that from you about challenging, because I think a lot of people would like to challenge more, but maybe it's not the courage. Maybe they just assume that, hey, it's not going to go anywhere. What are your thoughts for someone listening around challenging?
I think, it just sparked a thought as you were saying that. It's not just my willingness to challenge, it's my willingness to be challenged. And that starts with me as a leader, right? So and it's not natural, when somebody challenges me, like Jersey Girl wants to come out, you know what I mean? Like I'm sitting on her going, sit back. It's okay. It's not fight or flight. Just have a different perspective,
Yeah.
And so I have to be willing to hear their feedback, willing to hear their perspective, and willing to hear it gracefully and not feel like I'm being threatened in some sort of way, right? But I have to model it. It begins and ends with me as a leader, right? I have to model that. And the more I model it, the more people are going to do it. Then they'll feel comfortable leaning in and saying, hey, I don't see it that way, Angela. And here's why, So I think it starts with us as leaders.
That is so good. I once heard Brendan Bouchard talking about, he was talking about influence, but you could use it on this too. He said that in order to influence, we have to be open to be influenced. And, you were just talking about how really it starts with me being open to be challenged. Oh man, that is so good. I love that. I love that. Hey, I do like to ask this question, and before we pivot on to another question, that is, there's some people out there that are listening right now that says, I want to be a CHRO. That's like one of my goals. Any thoughts or tips around maybe something you have done or that you did to get to that point?
Yeah. So, a couple of things. So one is the importance of lateral moves. We used to call it, you weren't climbing a ladder, you were rock climbing. That's how we used to describe career development at Walgreens. The importance of lateral moves. And especially in organizations that were functionally siloed, the idea of moving over to another function or moving from a manager position in one area within a function to a manager position in another area of a function makes people feel like they're not moving up. All of that rock wall climbing that I personally did in my career set me up for what I'm doing today. Had I just stayed in HR business partner and just stayed in learning and development, I never would have had broad enough of a view to be able to do something like this. So I think that's super important. The other thing is, I did have to sit on my ego at times. Like, I'm not CHRO at Walgreens, right? Like, I had to get to a point where I realized I'm probably not going to be CHRO at Walgreens. That's probably not in me, but I can do it for a smaller organization, for an organization a quarter of the size, right? Because it requires a very different skill set that I was ready for and prepared for. Now, maybe in 20 years, I will be ready for a Fortune, but right now I'm not at that point in my career. And I had to be really honest with myself about that. And that was super important. But the experience I'm getting in this particular role right now, hands down, like, is just phenomenal, and it's probably one of the best development opportunities I've had in my career doing this. And so that's the other thing too, like waiting to be ready for it. We're never ready for it. You know what I mean? It's kind of sucking it up going, oh, I'm really good at that. Not so good at that, but I'm going to try it out, so.
That's fantastic. Oh my gosh, that is so good. I told everybody listening, this was going to be so good. I hope you're taking a lot of notes here. This is fantastic. Hey, we talked about leadership development. I want to talk about leading you. Hey, I love to hear, what I like to do is I like to pull out, if there's anything that you do every day that helps keep you on track. Can you kind of share maybe a typical day of Angela Deputy?
Yeah, so probably a couple of things. I have an incredible husband who is my best friend in the world, who always grounds me. So that's daily, being grounded with that consistency, to pretty challenging, amazing children, who keep me grounded and focused. So I think, my family and interaction with my family is pretty important. When I was reading through the questions and I was thinking daily, I don't know that I'm so consistent daily, as I am probably weekly.
Okay.
But daily I do work very hard to move, just physically move. That's a regular part of my daily routine. Years ago it was running. Now running has become a bit of a gallop. So I've tried, moving more towards lifting. They tell me that's better for this age that I'm slowly approaching. Walking. Doug and I have been playing a lot of golf lately, and I still stink. Yoga. Anything with like some forgiving movement, I'm doing on a regular basis. So that's pretty consistent. And then on a weekly basis, I think, the bigger thing is to make sure that I stay focused on my spirituality. And sometimes I'll do daily readings and reminders. But weekly I do. I've been attending church just remotely now for the past year. And obviously, the thing is, I actually like it better than going, because it's my time. So I may find that this is just what I do. But I do that, weekly, and it's just a reminder to me that, I have a purpose here and I'm here to serve others in this leadership role. And I like to be reminded of that weekly. So.
Oh, that's so good. That is so good. Oh my gosh. And for me, a lot of my things I do it's weekly, right? I have my, hey, what I want to get accomplished for this week. And so that way, when I start out on Monday, it's already planned out. Of course, being in our roles, it can always change, but we've got a plan for that. I love that. And I appreciate you sharing all that.
Oh, I was going to say, I do like to drink a lot of Italian red wine too. That keeps me pretty grounded. Just so you know.
That will definitely help. Oh my God, that is so good. I do like to ask my guests, and that is, we often get advice throughout our career, but sometimes we have advice. It's just so good. We just find ourselves sharing that with others often. Any advice that you got early on, maybe it was from a family member or a colleague, that you just find yourself sharing with others?
I don't know that I overtly share it because it was pretty harsh. That I was super, super early in my career. I was actually making the transition from ops to an HR or to a learning and development, training and development role at the time. And a beautiful woman, and her name's Annette Llewellyn. She was heading ops at Anixter at the time. And she said to me, pretty matter-of-factly, she said, Angela, in organizations, you can either be in operations on the front line serving the customer, or you can be behind the scenes serving the employee. And once you cease to be either, you are not of value to the organization. And the reason that was so important for me to hear is because it really framed up something I've carried with me in human resources my entire career. We are a serving function. And sometimes in human resources, we can build processes and procedures to serve ourselves. And so it's very important. And when we make them overcomplicated, very scientific, very academic, and they're not practical anymore. And they don't serve our customer or our employee. And so then we're of no use to the organization. So I've taken that with me and I've carried that. And that's why you always see, you'll see that, if I define things, I'll say I'm ops led, because that's really it. If it can't be practically utilized by the operator, then it's of no value.
That is absolutely fantastic. I love that. Oh, that is so good. I could go on and on and on. The common word you've used throughout this whole interview is serving. And I got to tell you, I got chills here because you're right on. Hey, let's shift over to the segment where I call It's Time to Accelerate. I'm going to ask you some fun facts to kind of wind down the show. And the first question I want to ask you is, would you rather read a book or listen to a podcast?
Lately, it's been, is listening to books enough?
Yes. No, listening to a book is good too.
Lately I've been listening to a lot of books. I've really been enjoying that.
Yeah. Any good ones that
but
stood
am I
out?
supposed to say, I'm supposed to say listening to a podcast, aren't I?
No, listening to my podcast.
I'm sorry, Bruce, listening to your podcast,
Yeah.
I'd rather do.
No. Hey, have there been any books that have stood out for you? Because I'm a big book reader and I always like to share if something stood out. Any stood out over the last year or so?
No, I've been listening to these Bill O'Reilly books lately.
Yeah.
I just listened to Killing Jesus and then Killing England. I'm a big Revolutionary War fan, so I'm really into his books lately. So.
Fantastic. Okay. I always like to know, what are you most grateful for?
Oh, my family, my heritage, my culture. Yeah.
That's fantastic. What are you most excited about in 2021 as we navigate through this pandemic and try to get to the other side?
I am most excited about hugging people again. I am a Jersey girl who likes to hug.
I'm right there with you. Oh my gosh.
Hi, Bruce. It's so good to see you. Come on, give me a hug.
I love that. I'm right there with you. Oh my gosh. I'm so ready. And it seems like a lot of organizations are starting to put together conferences for the fourth quarter of 2021. So I think we're going to see or get to experience a lot of that. Hey,
yeah. What
energizes you?
I think the opportunity to build. That's what's been so exciting too about this role. I onboarded a new generalist for us this morning, and I said, trust me, there's no structure. Like, you're building it. So, and that's what's so exciting. Like, we get to build it from scratch. That's really energizing to me.
Oh man, I love that. Yeah. I've talked to several different HR leaders that have said something similar, that they just like that. It energizes them so much to be able to bring someone on and really create that experience saying, hey, we're with you all the way. So I love that. Oh my gosh. Okay. Here's my last question for you, Angela.
Okay.
And the question is this: Angela, 10 years older, is knocking at your door and you're going to go answer that door. What's she going to tell you?
You should have drank that glass of wine because you didn't lose any weight. That's what she's going to say.
I love it. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Drink the wine.
You're not going to lose the weight.
You're definitely driving in the leadership lane. It has been an absolute honor to have you on the show. If someone wanted to connect with you, what would be the best way that they could connect?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. So that's probably one of the best ways. Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best way to connect with me.
Yep, on with Otto.
Yes, with Otto. But we're actually going through a rebranding project, so they're going to retake my picture. So Otto might not be on there, but yeah, he's on there now. So hurry fast.
Yeah, hurry fast. Oh my gosh. Listen, I appreciate you coming on and just sharing your wisdom. I know that there's a lot of people that are listening. They're going to get a lot out of this. And so I just want to say thank you. Appreciate you coming on. I appreciate your friendship.
Thank you. You're an incredible interviewer, Bruce. So thank you. This was probably one of the best podcasts. So thank you.
Awesome. I can't wait to share this. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, take care. Bye.